Ontario's Progressive Conservatives will be in London this weekend for their annual policy conference, and you can bet another item on the agenda will be the recent infighting that has been shaking up the party and calling the viability of Leader Tim Hudak's position into question. Joining us now for more on that, John Tory, who is the former leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party and the host of the Live Drive with John Tory on Newstalk 1010. Matty DiMuccio, Newmarket Town Councillor, columnist with the Toronto Sun. John Mikititian from the Bradgate Research Group, and John Capobianco with Fleischman Hilliard. Good to have everybody around the table today. Thanks for coming in for this discussion. I'm going to ask the three of you to get comfortable for a second, because John Tory, you've been where Tim Hudak is now. You've been the leader of the party, and I want to get a sense from you, having been there, what job one is at events like the one he's going to be attending this weekend. What's job one for him?
To motivate the party and have it feel comfortable with itself and with him in terms of the way forward to winning, which is that we have a plan, we have the man, and we're going to go forward and win, and that we can win, and that people have a sense of hope going out of there, so they'll work hard in the election where they live.
What do you do if you're Tim Hudak or John Tory 5 years ago, for example, and you've got all this stuff in the air that is not helpful?
Well, it's hard. I mean, because in the end, you've got a group of people, whether it's tiny, as I believe is the case now, or slightly bigger in my case, but nonetheless, they're people from within your own family who are, for one reason or another, trying to move you out or cause you trouble. And I think the first thing you could try to do is have those people, decide it's better to move on. I mean, I think the best thing that could happen, and I would sort of look right at the camera and say to those people out there, withdraw your motion. Forget about this. Your leader is your leader. Give him a chance to fight the election. He'll either win or he'll lose. That's in the hands of the voters. But, I think that's that he should be trying to deal with them. And if not, go in and recognize they are what they are, which is a minority of party members, a small minority, and acknowledge, however, at the same time, that things need to change. Because if we had the winning game plan and the winning team in place right now, I guess we'd be 15 points maybe 20 points ahead in the poll with this government of people who are tired, out of gas, full of scandals and all the rest. But they're not. So there's clearly something wrong with the plan and the team. And Mr. Hudak, respectfully, I would say, has never really acknowledged that. Even after the by-elections, which should have been a signal that we weren't quite on the right wavelength, notwithstanding the story that people try to tell about them.
But when you say something's got to change, he's outlined 12 different position papers on a wide variety of issues. He's brought them out over the past year, the paths to prosperity. You can't really spend a year and a half laying out party policy and then divorce yourself from it right away, can you?
Well, he said they were white papers, and if people are to take him at his word on that, which they were from the beginning, then I would say, just to pick an example that I'll come right out and come to the point on it, the right to work stuff, get rid of it. Say we put it out there, we had a discussion about it, and we found that with the people of Ontario, this is not going to give them a sense of hope and common purpose to go forward and create jobs and attract investment. It was an idea, we've listened, and we've decided to get rid of that and not go forward with that. Because I think, to me, that's scaring voters, and it is causing the party to be anxious in some quarters, but it's certainly causing people in the public to be anxious, and that can't be good. Mr. Hudak should be the repository of all of that sort of sense of hope and aspiration people have for Ontario to do better than we're doing today on the spending of money, on the creation of jobs, on the attraction of investment. People are looking at this policy and saying it's going to maybe provoke a war, which is the last thing we need, a war between Labour and management or whatever. We just need people to be positive and build up Ontario, not to be at war.
Taking your own example into account from years ago when you were the leader of the party, how much effort is undertaken in the opposition leader's office to ensure that he's not embarrassed out there on the floor on the day?
Too much. The bottom line is the office, I'm sure, for the last 2 weeks, if people want to be honest with you, or in the last 2 months, has been utterly and completely and 100% consumed with this. And all that means is that you are not consuming yourself with trying to find the best plan for jobs, the best plan for investment, the best way to get spending down, the best way to sort of attract the confidence of the people, and the best way to work on Tim Hudak's own image. Because we all have things in our image that could be improved, himself, myself, anybody. Maybe not you, Steve. But having said all that, so I think that the preoccupation is complete, I can assure you. It was with me, it was with leaders before me when you face these internal problems, and that's the problem. You are focused on that and not on the real issue, which is how do you defeat the government.
And when you say the preoccupation is complete, one last thing on this. Does that mean you spend a lot of time going around behind the scenes to your, let's not call them enemies, but say adversaries or critics at the moment, and twist arms as hard as possible to get them not to show up?
Not so much not to show up, but you certainly spend time with them. In my case, they were kind of people behind curtains and in the mist, and they never really came forward and identified themselves. I know now kind of who they were and what they're up to, and that's fine. I mean, it's done, it's history. But having said that, Mr. Hudak, in this case, these people have been quite open, so I commend them for that honesty. It's better than what faced me. But, so I think he might well have been spending some time, and I would hope, if they thought about this for 1 minute, that they would realize, the people who moved this motion, the best thing they could do is walk into that convention on Saturday and say, we're withdrawing that motion. We got to get on with talking about jobs here and forming a new government for Ontario, and that they just forget about it because they're going to lose. So it's only a matter of whether they want to make a point. Who are they teaching a lesson to here exactly? I don't think they're teaching a lesson to anybody except maybe they're hurting their own party, which last I checked. And the people who tried to undermine my leadership and did, to the point where I'm sitting here talking to you now as a former leader, they were people who, only hurt their own party in doing that in the end. They were people who actually campaigned against and financed activities against me, even when I was running in a by-election. And they're still involved today. But I say to myself, why would you bother belonging to an organization where you're sort of, out there sort of trying to cause it trouble? There's no good can come from what you're doing. And I think those people might think about that this weekend.
Was Tim Hudak one of those people?
Certainly people that are still close to him today were involved in that. So I can tell you that. I know that for a fact. And look, it's not to go over spilt milk. It is spilt milk and it's been cleaned up. But having said all that, it's just not a good thing to do. You don't stab your leader in the front or the back. Your leader is your leader. And if they've been properly elected and confirmed, as Mr. Hudak has by the party membership, then you go with that. Every minute you spend having the public and the media distracted by internal strife is a minute you are further away from government. Because people think if you can't manage your own affairs and keep your own team together, how can you form the government? Good question.
Okay, let's get everybody else involved here. I imagine you have all seen the email that Tim Hudak sent out to party members over the last week or so. We're going to read a little snippet of it here, and then we'll get everybody's comment. Here is Mr. Hudak's email, a little bit of it. We've put forward hundreds of ideas for a government that focuses on getting the big things right. But we can't campaign on 200 pages of policy. So we need to hone that into a winning Conservative platform to take to voters. One that shows them our optimistic Conservative vision for a better Ontario. We want to hear what you think. How do we reach voters in their hearts and minds with clear, concise, strong language that shows the PC party is on their side? Our campaign platform will be forged in those halls of the Convention Centre in London. This weekend, we will make history. We will build the foundation for the next PC government. We will all look back on this weekend and say, this was the beginning. This was the start of Ontario's comeback. Okay. John, when you get an email like that in your inbox, and you take a look at it and you read it, what do you think?
I feel encouraged. That's exactly what the leader of the party should be talking about. This convention, Steve, is about policies, about constitution. It actually is the unofficial kickstart for us for the election in 2014. And, notwithstanding the media's overblowing play about the leadership issue, this really is a constitution amendment session, a policy session. It's an opportunity for party members to get together, fine-tune their election readiness skills, to talk about policies, hone down some of the 200 policy discussions that they've had over the course of the last number of years, and actually get ready for an election. That's what it's all about. We've got this constitutional amendment that we have to deal with, and we will win that motion in the sense of we will be defeating it, so it'll get that out of the way, and we'll talk about policies.
You know, though, Maddie, that the media is going to be all over this constitutional amendment business, meaning make life more difficult for Tim Hudak.
Absolutely. The London 10, as they're called, had actually approached me, and that was after I wrote a column in June asking, that Tim's the problem with the members are that they're focused on his leadership and not on the policies and winning at large. And I think that where I agree with John is that we do absolutely, strategically, it's not a good time to be questioning that. But I do think that Tim has to put that leadership question aside because that's what we're obsessed with.
When you say put it aside, how?
Well, it could be argued that he should have addressed it, and he should go in there and say, yeah, I'm willing to accept this amendment, and I'm going to face it head on, and whatever happens, happens. And the reason that it's very psychological. If he faces it head on, it's not going to be an issue anymore, and he can move on. But the problem is that we're so focused on that that it's hard to get anything done. Now, the policies, yes, it's a great email what you just read, great email. The problem is that what the qualities that make a leader are very intangible, right? It's charisma, it's the style, and you can't really quantify those things. But he doesn't, I don't think he has those things. And I think that that's what's upsetting the members. And I think that he's got to face that amendment head on and say, we're going to deal with it, and I don't want to hear anything more.
Okay, I got to follow up here because I think you two just said different things. You said, here we go, off to the races, yes, beginning of victory, and you just said he hasn't got the charisma or style to do the job.
Well,
Did I hear that?
Well, I don't want to be taken out of context. He's a wonderful person, and I know him personally. He's a great guy. But I think that, he's, first of all, if he doesn't have those qualities, and I think most of us would agree he does not, if he doesn't have those qualities, like any other politician who doesn't, they have to work twice as hard. He's had some time to work hard. He's, the latest things that he's done by firing Sherman and getting him, and Hillier, what did that accomplish? I don't think that was really the right move, because he's suddenly become this, I don't want to say dictator, but he's just, where I'm putting all these ducks in a row and you guys better listen to me. It could be too little too late.
Well, let me go to John Mikitishyn on that. I think the idea behind that, and we're talking about Peter Sherman and Randy Hillier, who were two of his critics, two of his shadow cabinet critics, whom he fired from those positions. I think the idea was, I look tough, I look decisive, I look like a strong leader by putting in place people who disappointed me. Is that the effect of it?
I think at the end of the day it is, and I think I know Randy a little bit. I know Sherman much better. I'm disappointed with both of them. I'm looking forward to seeing Peter this weekend and saying, you're a great guy. I love you. I think a lot of you personally. And could you have been stupider than a bag of hammers?
Didn't break any rules.
Right. And sometimes you have to go beyond the rules and go to what you ought to do. Sometimes rules aren't enough. And Peter showed poor judgment. And no leader, not even John Tory, could have gotten away with having Peter Sherman stay in that position. He would have become a distraction every time he stood up in the House. So Tim Hudak did the right thing, not because he wanted to, because what he had to do as leader, which was remove someone who was going to be a distracting issue from fulfilling on the promise of that letter.
Would a smarter, better leader have said, when Peter Sherman went to him in the first place and said, I want to take this housing allowance, which I'm allowed to take, optics may be questionable, but I'm allowed to take it, would a better leader have said, no, you can't do that, at the beginning of this story, rather than say, I have to fire you at the end of the story? Because he knew about it ahead of time.
Well, that presupposes that a conversation like that happened. So that's second guessing, because
Peter Sherman says that conversation happened.
And somebody else might say it didn't happen. That's where there becomes another conundrum with all of this, right? Like, at least when John Tory and I have disagreed over our many years in the party, we've known what the other's opinion was and respected each other for that, and then went and got enough votes so our side prevailed one way or the other. With a he said, she said, or a he said, again, it's another needless distraction which doesn't help anybody.
John?
The challenge, Steve, is this. I think the leader would have gotten criticized no matter what he would have done. If he didn't act on either Peter Sherman or Randy Hillier, he would have gotten criticized from somebody saying, you don't show leadership. And of course, given the fact that this is an issue coming up to this convention, it would have been even more pronounced. I thought what he did is he handled it well. You can't allow for any caucus member to spill any caucus solidarity or secrets or confidentiality. You have to punish him. You didn't kick him out of caucus. He just basically said you're going to be stripped of your portfolio and you're going to sit in the back rows. You're going to be in the penalty box, in a sense, for the next little while. And with Peter Sherman, although, and I, like John, I know Peter Sherman very well, and I think he meant well and didn't break any laws, but the perception, I think, in politics is reality. And the fact that he was the critic portfolio for finance, and he had this financial issue, the question then became, how much credibility would he have had if he was going to attack Minister Sousa on financial issues when he himself had some level of controversy around it? So again, Tim did the right thing by doing that.
So John Tory, all right, go ahead.
And it plays into the worst stereotype of politics, right? The vast majority, I'm talking like 99.9% of people involved in public life, do it for the right reasons. And then there's the odd one that doesn't. Peter Sherman, I'm sure, didn't have any pecuniary interest. He's not that kind of guy. But it feeds into the stereotype that politicians are only there at the trough to get the most that they can for themselves. That certainly wasn't John Tory's case, certainly not almost anybody I know or ever met in politics, but it happens rarely. But if he would have kept that portfolio, it would have given the Liberals a spurless argument to then continue and distract people from the dozens of real disastrous policies and nightmarish scandals they've had.
Okay, so all of this will be percolating at the conference in London, no doubt, as will, and John Tory, you tell me how much you think. Since the 2011 election, there have been 7 by-elections in the province of Ontario, and the Conservatives have won 1. 1 out of 7. And the one they won was Doug Holliday. So everybody's giving him the credit as opposed to the leader or the party. How much of that will be percolating in the convention in London?
Well, I think it will actually be the principal argument. It's difficult to advance the argument that Maddie advanced with respect to, charisma and so on, because one person's charisma is another person's, non-charisma. But what you can point to is facts and say, well, look, in these by-elections, not that a lot of them were Liberal seats. However, you also have the Liberal Party at a point when they should be at their absolute lowest of the low with the scandals and the state of the economy even that affects governments negatively. And so that's where I come back and sort of say, well, let's not have a gang obsession on Tim Hudak and say, aha, you only won 1 out of 7, you should go. But I would expect that he would have done more than he has done in the aftermath of the latest 5 to say, well, clearly, the plan we have in place and the team we have in place is not exactly what the doctor ordered, because we would have done better. I'm not saying they should have won all 7, but they probably should have won at least, say, 2 or 3, and they didn't. So to me, that's indicative of something where when we had the chance to sort of go out there and where people know they have a freebie, they're not going to change the government, they decided not to pick us. And so, to me, that's one of the things I think he has to acknowledge without getting into the dust and the dirt with the people who are doing this, but say, look, I know some things have to change, and that includes a bit with me, and I'm going to work hard at that, but also some of our policies and some of our approaches and perhaps even some of our team, because we haven't done as well as we should have done in those by-elections.
If I can say something, Steve, it's almost redundant. I mean, this is what Tim Hudak said in the last convention in 2000 and was it 11?
After the last provincial
right.
election.
So, so he gave that speech. We're going to change our policies. I'm going to do better. I'm going to reach out more, and those by-elections were proof of the status quo. I haven't seen it. Now, I could speak with some authority on policy because I'm one of those people that actually did attend some of the grassroots sessions around Toronto. I wasn't really. I looked at the policy. It wasn't very appealing to me. And as a mother, I've got 3 children. As a woman, especially, I think that one of the problems that Tim has, and this is going to be a big challenge, is that he's up against 2 females. And if you look at that, you've got one man who's attacking females. That perception alone is not a good one. I think you wrote about it in your blog, the statistics, 85% of Ontarians want a female leader, or at least they would like to have.
85, these were Greg Lyle's numbers, whom we're having on later, who said that when he did polling, 85% of Ontarians thought it was pretty cool that we have a female premier.
Right, okay. So, but that's very telling. So he's got that one challenge, but I think that the policies is important. I think that they need, and I wrote about this in one of my columns, education is a big file. And what we're hearing about education is mostly the fighting between the unions and the Working Families Coalition. And to the average person who's going to work every day and dropping their kids off, they don't understand that. What you need to do is touch. You had mentioned you got to inspire somebody to vote. I'm not inspired to vote if I'm hearing code words like e-health and gas plant scandals and unions, and I don't understand that. I think that's one of the biggest.
One more code thing, because I think it's important, and I'll say it here because it needs to be said in the interest of our party, which is that last time in the campaign in 2011, there were some codes used, not even codes, about foreign workers and about gay Ontarians. And they were used quite repeatedly and therefore as part of a conscious strategy. And they left some very bad aftertaste in the minds of people who would think on that basis alone they might exclude the PC party as an option. It's 2013. This party needs to win seats in 905 and 416, where last time I checked, 50% of the people who live here were born somewhere else, and a lot of people are very embracing of the fact we are diverse, including gay people and lots of immigrants and so on. And I think the party has not done that again, but I think it hasn't at the same time sort of reached out to those people. Tim has made some personal efforts, I will say that, but the party itself has not wiped away the lingering odor of that stuff, which I thought was disgraceful, frankly.
John McAtishon, there was a time when a guy with your last name would not have been very welcomed in the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party. And now people
That's kind of not just unique to the party. My dad was the first ethnic president of the local Lions Club, so I know the culture shift.
But what has Tim Hudak done, I guess, in the last couple of years to, as John Tory suggests here, turn the channel on the foreign workers business, the campaign that was run against gay Torontonians? What's he done to make people who are female or ethnic or have a sexual orientation different from the mainstream to make them feel more comfortable in this party?
I wouldn't be the person to ask to be a spokesman for Tim, but I'd suggest that it's been going to a very far-reaching policy process. It's, when Mike Harris won, way back in another century, the reality was Mike won for the fundamental issues that every mother, every kid understood, pocketbook issues, right? That's what it was about. So the policies that he's been addressing so far have been wide-reaching. Now, what's the plan going to be? I had an opportunity to speak to him at a delegate meeting a week ago, and one of the things I suggested was, let's get to the platform. Let's boil all this down. Let's get to 5 things that we can go out there so everybody knows what we're talking about, and people can know they're either going to support or they're not going to support, and they'll go away.
Well, let me follow up with John Capobianco on that, because if part of what John Tory would like to see is a party that abandons some of its more right-wing tendencies and moves more into the middle, more into the, if I can put it this way, the Bill Davis tradition of the party, the big blue machine, the red Tory, Tim Hudak can't really do that, can he? That's repudiating everything he stands for.
I think at the end of the day, what you have to do as a party leader is actually espouse what you believe as a leader and as a party that you think is best to take this province to a new direction. And I think to what John was saying about some of the policies that happened in the last election, well, he paid for it. He lost the election as a result of some of the policies. And I remember when John was leader of the party, some of the policies that he had weren't particularly favorable with the electorate, and he lost. So, I think it's important to sort of understand and learn from the past, but it's also to move on to the future. And Matty says something about the policies. Well, we're not sure about his policies. Well, he's got 14 white papers, the most that anybody's ever had as far as party leader is concerned, as far as bringing them out, discussing them with party members, having the media and having, Ontarians discuss them and debate them. And that's what this policy conference is about.
You've got to hand it to him for putting out serious policy ideas. You may not like them, but they're out there.
Plus, he has over 40 policy advisory committees actively working and coming up with submissions and new ideas and thoughts, which, again, are going to be talked about at this convention.
But they're not, if I hear Matty correctly and if I hear John Tory correctly, they are not welcoming to women, and they are not welcoming to the red Tory faction of the party that used to be in charge.
Everybody would say this, and I was a 416 candidate, not unsuccessfully, but I was a 416 candidate. So I get the 416 feel, and I understand the whole urban-rural divide. The fact of the matter is, and people will say that he didn't win he won 1 of the 5 by-elections. Well,
1 out of 7.
He won Toronto. And he won Toronto pretty big with Doug Holliday.
Did he win it?
Well, you know what? He did win it. If you're going to blame Tim
I know
Hudak,
that's your old riding, and you know it better than I do. But did he win that, or Doug Holliday win it?
If you're going to blame Tim Hudak for losing 4 others, then give him the right to lay claim for the fact that he won 1.
Okay.
Right? That is what. And he won 1. And by the way, he was the one that actually attracted Doug Holliday. Doug Holliday ran for us, not because of the Conservative Party brand, because of Tim Hudak and who he believed as a leader and could be the next premier. That's why Doug Holliday won. And I can tell you, with some level of assurances, that's the case.
One of the big questions here is why can he not get into the 416? Why can't he get in Toronto? Now, I agree. Personally, I think that Doug Holliday won because he's Doug Holliday, and I think he was very popular in that area. But if you compare it to Harper, because a lot of people say, well, Harper can win and Ford can win. Why can Tim Hudak not get in? If you look at what Harper did, though, he focused on the 905 before he went into Toronto. So he got Vaughan, he got Brampton, he got Etobicoke, he got Mississauga.
He's got all of them but 1 now.
And then he came into the 905 and he got Richmond Hill and he got, so what I'm saying is that you've got to go slow, and you've got to, before you go into Toronto, you've got to knock on the doors of the surrounding areas, and then Toronto will welcome. Because I think that it sort of falls into pattern.
By that yardstick, that Hudak is even further away from victory than Harper was, because at least Harper managed to get the suburbs before he got the inner suburbs of Toronto. Tim Hudak hasn't even got the suburbs yet.
Well, if I remember,
in Toronto now, Stephen, and quite frankly, I think let's look at history. When Brian Mulroney won the 416s, when Stephen Harper won the 416s, when Mike Harris won the 416s, they were all sweeps. They were all sweeps. Tim Hudak actually won a 416 riding that wasn't a sweep. It was actually more hard fought than the other ones were. Where in the case of Brian Mulroney, Stephen Harper, and Mike Harris, all of the votes were all coming in, and Toronto just got swept with everybody else. Whereas with Hudak, it wasn't the case.
One final point on your red Tory question. Tim Hudak should not try to turn himself into a red Tory, because he's not. What I think he should avoid doing, though, is what he's done, say, with a really good policy on education in this white paper. He's got in there more people directed towards colleges, more people directed towards apprenticeships, both fantastic, relevant ideas to jobs for the future.
But he punishes
stuck
as
in
well.
there this thing that said if you didn't get good marks, you'd have your student loans cut off. What is that all about? And that's the stuff that's meant to be the kind of gimmicky stuff that gets people that like red meat and raw meat,
There's
you know,
always a
excited.
negative tone,
And I'd say,
yeah.
look, get rid of that stuff. Like, that's not getting any votes. The people who like that stuff are already voting for us. You know, talk about the aspiration of students going into college and doing well and getting a job and having more apprenticeships. He's right on that stuff.
Let me invite all of you to look at the monitors in the studio here, because a couple of weeks ago we had another group in here talking about some of these issues. And Martin Redcon, whom I'm sure you all read in the Toronto Star, had this to say about the issue that I think has dogged Tim Hudak wherever he goes, and that is, how authentic a politician is he? Roll tape, please.
He compares unfavorably to both Andrea Horwath and Kathleen Wynne on authenticity. They come across, even though Andrea Horwath reads her lines a lot too, they come across as more genuine. Tim Hudak tries too hard. So that's one big thing. I think his policies perhaps are not a great fit for Ontario right now, barring the kind of post-NDP rebellion that we saw in 1995. So I think he has a few things going against him.
John McAtisham, what do you do about a candidate who, when you sit around a table like this or you have a beer with him, is one kind of guy, personable, charming, friendly, funny? When the red light on that camera goes on, he's a different guy.
You do a better job at communicating. All the stuff Martin just said, there was two words that I agreed with. And the two words were...
That's about right.
No, and the words were right now. Right? So, I mean, I'm in the public opinion business, and nobody knows better than me the meaningless of it taken out of context. So the only numbers that matter to Tim Hudak are the next general election. And here's the deal. He has to have 100% of the deal done to get him to where he needs to go, or it's over. And it's as simple as that. Now, what that looks like, I can tell you, we've had some famous cases in our party's history. Right? Frank Miller, who was known as the tartan suit man, became a blue suit man 5 seconds after he became leader by his advisors. And then we had a great guy that I supported for leader of the party and won on the second time, Larry Grossman, who actually I think was considerably to the left of John Tory, who I stood on a chair in Hamilton in that election where he ran in '87 and cheered at the most right-wing speech I'd ever heard in my life. Neither of those men were authentic the minute they became leader because they listened to advisors. And maybe that's part of the problem. I'm not sure whether it's listening to the wrong advisors or listening to people who, not trusting his own gut. So if I had a piece of advice for Tim, it would be look into yourself, look at who you truly are, and share that authentically with the world, come hell or high water.
Do you see him being able to do? I'm sure people have given him that advice before.
I really don't know.
You're not sure?
No, and knowing
Well,
some of
but
the
I
very
think they
bright
have.
people around him, I'd suggest that they've tried to script him and tried to steer him in the directions they thought would be better.
Because that's what you hear all the time. He's so scripted, so message tracked, so.
And if you know Tim, like a lot of us do, you know, in person he's absolutely. But I also find too that he's running to be premier of the province. He's not running to be someone's friend. At the end of the day, you know, every leader, if you look in history, yet again, exclusive of John, who everybody loved and still loves. But when you look at sort of Mike Harris in 1990, when he was elected leader of the Conservative Party, and I was in the youth wing at the time, but I remember him saying, "Oh, he's a golf pro from North Bay, never has a chance to become premier of this province." Look at Stephen Harper. And again, I reference the fact that
Mike
I ran
connected
for
with
him.
people. Mike Harris could connect with Mr. and Mrs. Everyday
you never
Ontario.
knew that, though, Steve, when he became leader of the party, because he was just a backbench NPP no one knew from North Bay, and yet he became leader. Hold on. But Stephen Harper, yet again, in 2004, he becomes his leader, and everybody thought he was this vast right-wing guy from Alberta. And again, so I think what you saw with Tim Hudak is you saw an election campaign that everybody thought he was going to win for sure because he was 20 points ahead, but he actually got the Liberals to a minority government, which is not a bad start for a first-timer. Give him a chance. He will do a better job this next time around.
You know what? I knocked on doors in 2011. I was a tough campaigner. I was working on Kevin Gaudette's campaign. I did
In
some,
one of the Scarborough ridings?
Yes, Scarborough Pickering. I also did some work for Richmond Hill, who is Vic Gupta. What I heard at the doors was this is exactly what I would hear very consistently. I like the party. I like their policies. I like their direction. I don't like that guy, and they would point at his picture. Why? Because it was a question of trust. It doesn't mean he's a bad guy. He's a great guy. Having a one-on-one beer with him, he's a great guy. But it's the perception of trust. And the problem is that he comes across, and I said this earlier, those are qualities that are intangible. He comes across as distrustful. I can't put my finger on it. He might grow into it. He might grow into the you had mentioned, John, you know, he's not your friend, he's the leader, but this is politics, and you've got to appeal. Unfortunately, there's a sort of that celebrity.
Well, you got to be liked.
You're a leader, so
You'd
there's
like
that celebrity.
Liked or feared or respected or
who
something.
would say that Stephen Harper's the kind of guy that they would like to go have a beer with, right?
No,
but
he's an
because you want
exceptional
somebody,
role.
but you want somebody. Oh, Steve, you want somebody who's going to go to Syria and actually face down the dictators. You want somebody who's going to go internationally and get bilateral trade deals done. They don't want somebody they want somebody who's competent, who's seen as competent.
The difference, though, is Harper. He rules with an iron fist, and he's a very well organized. That's a very well organized
it's liked
party.
Or feared or respected.
If you don't respect me, then you fear me. And Tim didn't get that. And going back to Sherman, going back to Sherman, though, what he did with Hillier and Sherman, why didn't he do that to Cleese? I mean, Cleese is the guy, let's not forget, who wanted to run for speaker. That would have thrown everything in disarray. And to me, I'm looking as an insider, I'm thinking, well, is he afraid to do that to Frank Cleese? I mean, if anyone deserved it, you can make that argument that, you know, he was not just, he's always, he's the maverick who causes trouble. So
No, you actually come up with a good point. There was Frank, who maybe wasn't feeling loved and was looking for other options and could have pursued running for speaker. And he had a conversation with his leader who said, and I wasn't there for it, so this is from what I've heard, you know, Frank, I appreciate what you're thinking, but we really need you. Not just me. We need you. The party needs you. And Frank Cleese does what he's always done, whether he was a policy guy or an elected official, he's done what's in the best interest of the party.
I don't agree with that.
I'm going to jump in here and read a quote that I want John Tory to comment on. This is from Sue Ann Levy, who, of course, was a candidate for the PC party in a previous by-election, won by Eric Hoskins, and, of course, with your newspaper now, the Toronto Sun. On the recent 1 for 5 of the August by-elections, not including the 2 previous where he's 1 for 7. Here's Sue Ann Levy. If, after 10 long years of lying, Dalton McGuinty, $1 billion wasted on e-health, the abuses of Orange, massive debt, corruption, and the refusal of an unelected premier, Wynne, to cough up emails on the gas plant scandal, the PCs can only win 1 seat to the Liberals 2, there is something dreadfully wrong with this picture. It seems they are still light years behind the other 2 parties, connecting with visible minority voters who want a fiscally conservative government in place. They've done virtually nothing as well to counteract the myth that Hudak leads a party of angry white males who want to desecrate public services and commit various other crimes against humanity. Come on, Sue Ann, get off the fence, tell us what you really think. But is she onto something there?
I think so. Now, I will say, in fairness, I think Tim Hudak has begun to make some efforts at that. I mean, there's things I've seen him at, people he's been reaching out to where he's been starting to make an effort. It's just that I think we had that unfortunate chapter in between where the party was seen, to use her words, as that sort of party of angry old white rural people. And look, white rural people and even angry old ones they're Ontarians too, and they're terrific, and the party has to sort of make sure it earns their confidence as well. But it looked like in past times we were turning our backs on the other people who make up Ontario of 2013. And Tim's begun to try and deal with that, but I think he's got to redouble those efforts and make sure the policies as well are things where people feel that sense of aspiration for their children. Because the one thing we've all got in common, whether we're black or brown or gay or whatever we are, is we have children and we have the next generation coming along, and we're proud of Ontario and we want it to grow and prosper and do better. And I don't think the policies they've put out so far have tapped into that feeling. It's been more a feeling that we're sort of angry people that are negative about everything, and Tim comes across a bit that way just because he's always talking about that stuff. It's part of the curse of the opposition leader's job. It is your job to point out all the things that are wrong with them, but it's also your job to say, I'm going to give you a sense of hope that I will do better and we will do better. And I think that's what he's got to really work on coming out of this convention, and they could get to work minute 1 if these people would just abandon ship and forget about this silliness.
The most successful Conservative premier in the last 20 years, on the day he got elected, the number one thing that was said by the people who supported him was, if only he'd do what he campaigned on.
Mike Harris.
Mike Harris. That's Tim's challenge, to have people believe that the platform he runs on is one that they want to support and that he's the only leader, regardless of any other characteristic, that will deliver.
Yeah, but you know what, speaking of Mike Harris, I think that's part of the problem here. I think that we are living in the 90s. We're in the Mike Harris era, and that can be used against us. We saw that in the last election where the Liberals were fixated on Mike Harris, these crazy psychos, they're going to make all sorts of cuts, and that's part of our problem. This is we're 2013. This is not the Mike Harris era, and sometimes that actually brings us down. I love Mike Harris. I loved what he did, and I think that he's a great man, but we've got to really move ahead from that. And I really think it's got to be a completely fresh new party. If we appeal to that freshness, then we have a better chance. But if we sit in the past and we're fixated on it, we're gonna be stagnant. We're not going to move ahead.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And I think, quite frankly, even Tim Hudak will say to you that he is his own man. He's got his own party. He's got his own policies. He's got his own people behind him. And he's got candidates, quite frankly, that are reflective of Ontario. He's got minorities. He's got women and men. He's got a great bunch of candidates who are going to be the voice of the party moving forward. I think it's important to understand what happened in the past. It's good to learn from it, take the good from and leave the bad behind. But there's no question that Tim Hudak is his own person who's actually going to be, when he becomes premier, he'll be doing his own thing as government, as leader.
But I know, John Tory, from listening to your radio show, that you get frustrated when you hear the party constantly going on about gas plants and not focusing enough, in your view, I guess, on job creation and other social service issues that you think are more top of mind for the voters.
Can there be a person left, Steve, who doesn't think the gas plant thing is a fiasco of the highest order? And that these people deserve to be turfed out on that basis alone if people are of that mind?
So stop beating that drum?
I think we've got that point established. The Liberals have helped a lot with all of their conduct on the matter, and Tim Hudak and others have done a good job. So let's move on. Let's say, okay, we know that's over there as a scandal. Let's talk about what we're going to do to run Ontario better. Let's talk about the changes we're going to make to make it better. Let's talk about the aspirations of this great province that once was on top of everything in Canada, and it slipped. And that's not all the Liberals' fault, but it is what it is. And I think if Tim Hudak started to talk about how we can be better and how we can get Ontario back on top and get a job for your kids created and attract investment and really get this province going again, I think you'd see things start to turn around. They'd identify with that message, and they would overlook some of these other things that maybe he can't change. How do you change how you talk or what your hair looks like?
Well, to be fair, he did that today. I mean, he came out with an announcement on the Scarborough subway backing City Council's position, saying that the Liberal government's plan isn't enough and it's short-sighted. So he's doing that. The question is, will that be reported? And in the mix of the next 72 hours of commentary around politics, it's going to get lost because of all this distraction, because of this constitutional amendment, which has no hope of passing whatsoever. And that's all it's going to be, is a distraction that won't even be remembered a month from now, and have sucked up a lot of time and energy, as John said, and annoyed a lot of people to no positive outcome.
And I
30 seconds to go.
I absolutely agree. And I think that, but I still think he needs to address the leadership question so we can move on. I agree we need to be working on policy. But as we saw yesterday, Kathleen Wynne was in Mitchell, Ontario. That takes a little bit of, that was pretty bold. She's appointed herself as the agricultural minister, but she appointed herself as the agricultural minister. She is wooing those voters, and that should be a signal to us to get very serious here, because she's winning. She's on the defensive and...
Save him 10 seconds. He wants to say one last thing.
I was just going to say, Matty, on the leadership issue, and Matty, you're right. Let's get it done this weekend. It's going to be, the motion is going to be defeated. It'll be over, and let's move on. And let's actually talk about policies that are going to affect Ontarians. Let's do that.
Let me thank all four of you for coming in and helping us with this discussion, starting with John Tory, whom we love listening to from 4 to 7 on News Talk 1010, Matty DiMuccio, the Newmarket Town Councillor, John Mikitician from Bradgate Research Group, John Capobianco from Fleischman Hilliard. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.